Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Monsters Under the Magnolia by J.L. Collins, narrated by Tiffany Morgan. Chapter 1. Wrestling. I should have just said no. In the ornate mirror hanging over my headboard, my reddened face and wisps of stringy blonde hair made me take pause. The gloss I'd so carefully applied to my lips was smeared, the edge of my perfectly winged eyeliner was smudged. I looked like I belonged on one of those trashy cop shows with the hookers and the 3-time DUI offenders. I blew a strand of hair out of my face. Even the bed's groaning protest couldn't stop me as I hauled myself back on top of the suitcase and straddled it with my one beignet too many sized rear end. "Lordy, Birdie, I've never seen you put up such a fight," Cinda roared. She held her thicker middle in as she shook with laughter and nearly fell off the poof next to my vanity. "It's like watching old Jed wrestling one of those gators, isn't it?" Perhaps if I had any idea who old Jed was, I might have been more inclined to take her comment in stride, but as it was, I was far too busy trying not to slide off the edge of the new suitcase. "Not far off," Gina chuckled. She was leaned up against the doorway with her arms crossed, surveying the whole scene as per usual. "Are you sure you don't need any help?" I looked over my shoulder at her, doing my best not to huff and puff. "I've got it, darling." It took me another good charge at it, but I finally got the stupid suitcase zipped shut and flopped backward on the bed, not caring just how unladylike I looked. "That was something," Cinda said as she lent me her hand. "I figured you had some kind of handy bag or magic potion you could use to make that less harrowing." It was true. There was something I could have used, but as I'd explained to both Cinda and Gina before, I'm not terribly skilled in charms, and that's exactly what I needed, an extension charm. That was more in my grandmother's wheelhouse than it is in mine. Gina and Cinda exchanged a look. It probably had something to do with the fact that I rarely, if ever, talked about my estranged family. "So," I said, quickly changing the subject, "I suppose you two are all packed then?" "About as packed as I'll ever be," Cinda said, shrugging. She was probably the last one on board for the crazy excursion ahead of us tomorrow. "Franny was 2 seconds away from coming over and fussing over my stuff for me." No surprise there. Franny, our bubbly friend that lived next to Cinda in our cul-de-sac, had been the one to spring the surprise on us in the first place. None of us had known quite what to say when we all opened our new suitcases and found matching cruise tickets inside. Cinda and her cousin TJ were the first to raise concerns. It took a few weeks to finally convince them they wouldn't die of the bubonic plague in some maritime epidemic. Franny had even offered to rent a car for the 5 of us to venture to Tampa Bay from our little corner of Mississippi, just so the 2 of them didn't have to worry about plane turbulence, even if neither of them had ever been on an airplane. "I doubt I really need to ask you," I said as I turned back to Gina and smoothed down my blouse. "You probably had your bags packed 3 days ago. Am I right?" Her cheeks went pink. "I'm sure I have no idea what you're talking about." Cinda and I snorted. Gina was the planner and mother hen out of the bunch. Even her sock drawer was neat and orderly. As someone who spent the last few years on the Vegas Strip as a top illusionist, I was fine with winging it and leaving my mess out of sight and out of mind. "What about TJ? Did she even start getting ready for the trip?" Gina nudged Cinda with a raised brow. TJ was not well known for her punctuality. She lived by her motto, "I'll get there when I get there." "That old crone isn't even at home. The last I checked, she was having lunch with Scott." Scott Claus was TJ's new boyfriend, which made for a good jumping board for Cinda teasing her rather grumpy cousin. So, to answer your question, the heck if I know. Gina frowned and pulled out her phone. I was willing to bet dollars to dumplings that she was getting on TJ's case, just in case. Once I had everything all together, I dragged my suitcase and bags downstairs, careful not to bang into the worn-down railings too hard. Even with having a professional come out and give me tips on the house renovation in the fall, I still managed to forget to have the grand staircase and railings fixed before getting started on the upstairs. Oops. I kept my eye out for Grifter's long, wagging tail, but he wasn't anywhere to be found. He usually wasn't whenever I had company, mainly because I was the only one who could see him. Even though Gina and Cinda knew the truth about me being a witch, I still hemmed and hawed over telling them everything, like how I had a ghost dog for a pet and an old woman haunting my backyard. Sorry, my cemetery. I poured us glasses full of my favorite peach sweet tea and imagined the spring coming on soon. March in the South had a funny way of creeping up on you. One minute it's cold and blustery, and the next minute birds are singing and little shoots of new life are sprouting everywhere, along with the pollen, that darn pollen. I still can't believe we're leaving for a cruise tomorrow. Cinda sipped on her tea slowly, shaking her head. I don't think Franny will ever top this one. Gina nodded. And I certainly hope she won't try. I wish she wouldn't have spent so much money on everything. I didn't know much about the Paynes' financial situation other than the fact that Franny's husband was the chief deputy sheriff and her own family was well off. I feel the same way, but she doesn't seem too broken up about it. Maybe she'd been saving for something like this. At least it would make me feel better about accepting such a generous gift. I refused to look at the price of the ticket after the first time. Gina looked out the front window 1,000 miles away. Whatever the case is, I just know I'm not doing the driving tomorrow, Cinda said between sips. Franny likes to drive. TJ's got a lead foot bigger than her mouth. What about you, Birdie? You going to volunteer to take a leg of the trip? I'd already mentioned that driving never really bothered me. Sure, I don't mind. There's plenty of time to split up anyway. Franny said it'll be about 12 hours unless we stop more than a couple of times to eat and use the bathroom. And let's be real, that's definitely going to happen. The other two debated the best places to stop along the way, while I imagined the warm sun on my face while I lounged in a chair with a cold cocktail in my hand. Even though I've been around for the past 133 years, never once had I thought to travel on a cruise anywhere. The sinking of the Titanic and Lusitania had pretty much sealed my opinion on the matter. Look at her, Cinda chuckled, drawing me out of my daydream. Already in La La Land, huh? I smirked. If you're so interested. Closing my eyes, I drew myself up to my full height, straightening my back out and inhaling through my nose, letting my breath out as I imagined the blank slate in my mind. Little by little details started to emerge, the crystal-clear waters cresting against the massive ship, the squawking of seagulls nearby, the smell of the salt coming off the breeze. Beside me, I was faintly aware of Cinda and Gina both gasping to themselves. I'll never get tired of that, Gina said, a hint of a smile in her voice. Think of all the things you could make others see. This wasn't the first time Cinda and I had this conversation. That sexy guy from whatever that superhero movie was, strolling up on TJ only for him to turn into a bunch of rattlesnakes. Oh, she'd hate that one. I should have been born a witch, too. Me and Gina both rolled our eyes as I let down my screen. An unusual flicker of static zipped up the underside of my hand, and I glanced down at it for a moment before turning my attention back to Cinda. It's probably for the best that you weren't. Poor TJ would never catch a break. I sagged against the edge of my kitchen counter, surprised at how thirsty I was as I downed half of my tea at once. "You all right there?" Gina asked. "Yep, I'm fine. Just a little thirsty is all." Using my special abilities energy didn't usually make me so tired, but I probably needed a good night's sleep, and my body liked to periodically remind me that just because I age slower than a non-magical person didn't mean I was immune to getting older. Extra beauty sleep certainly wouldn't hurt any. Chapter 2. Special Guests. I leaned against the van door, thankful to be outside of it. Glancing around at the rest of the crew, it was obvious I wasn't the only one. TJ was fanning herself with a crossword puzzle book she'd picked up inside the first gas station we stopped at. Beads of sweat slowly slid down her temples, only further highlighting her hard-set jaw. Cinda nearly fell out of the passenger seat as she opened the door and let out a groan. "I don't think my hips will ever forgive me for that." "At least it wasn't the very back. Quit your whining and grab me a water from the cooler, will you?" TJ jutted her thumb back toward the inside of the van as Cinda froze and gave her the side eye. "What?" But Cinda just pursed her lips and went and fished around in the small red cooler for what was sure to be the only bit of cold anything left inside the vehicle at this moment. After the van lost its AC somewhere in the panhandle yesterday, we were sweating like pigs, stuck with rolling down the front windows and begging for a breeze in the back before we pulled into the motel to stop for the night, and today was no better. Even Franny seemed to be having second thoughts on renting the van. She studied the outside of it for a moment, then pulled the sparkly pink phone case from her purse and punched in a number. "I'm making sure they give us a new rental on the way back," she whispered to me. I nodded and pulled away from the van, the back of my t-shirt peeling away from it only to stick to my skin. "Give 'em the business, darling. Don't take no for an answer." Gina slammed the trunk shut and dragged her suitcase over to us. "That's everything in the back. We just need to make sure we've got everything from inside before we go into the terminal." Parked on the bottom level of the parking garage stationed right outside the ship docks, we weren't able to see much of anything. One by one, we trailed behind Franny, our cruise leader as it were, out of the parking garage and into the muggy world of Tampa Bay, Florida. I'd been to Florida a number of times, had some fun here and there, but I'd never really taken in something like this. The Magnolia on water wasn't the only cruise ship docked under the blinding light of the sun, but it was certainly the biggest. It towered over two smaller ships and seemed to glisten with its own kind of special ambiance. People rushed past us out of the garage as we stood there, all looking up at our temporary home for the next 10 days. TJ let out a long whistle, but Franny strode forward. "No use in standing around gawping at it. Let's move it, ladies." The traffic snarled around the cruise terminal, with pedestrians crossing at each intersection left and right. I did my best to keep up with the flow of people, hoping that the cruise ship itself wouldn't be quite so jam-packed. Inside, the building was lackluster, reminding me more of a busy airport than the gateway to paradise, but I knew the glitz and glamour always had a stagehand in the back propping everything up. I smiled as we got in the line with our luggage. "Anyone else getting excited?" Franny practically squealed. "Finally! I was hoping I wasn't the only one." Gina just laughed. "I think I'll be more impressed once we've actually made it onto the ship." "And even then we'll have to see if it's up to snuff," TJ said, throwing her small duffel bag over her shoulder with a nod. "It better be if I dragged my behind 12 hours east just to sit in some boat." "Some boat?" Cinda repeated, snorting. "Noah himself could build a boat big enough to reach heaven, and you'd still ask to see the upstairs. Look, we're up." The security officers beckoned for us, and we made a beeline to the metal detectors. It didn't take much longer before we were standing right outside the ship with our tickets ready in Franny's hands. The older woman at the podium looked at us with a sweet but vacant expression. "Names?" she asked, her voice at odds with her looks. Where I expected a sort of dreamy tone, the woman's voice sounded as if it were slowly dragging across rocks. Franny was busy fussing at something on her sundress until Gina nudged her. With her baby blues wide and her face pink, Franny winced and handed the woman the small stack of tickets. "Oh, sorry, Payne, Francine." The woman didn't seem at all perturbed over Franny's fumbling and merely watched her without moving a muscle. Honestly, the woman didn't seem to care about much at all with the way she seemed to stare right through us all as we quietly thanked her as she stamped our tickets one by one. "One more thing," she croaked. "We've done the service of upgrading your rooms. You'll find yourselves in the rotunda, in Suite B. If you have trouble finding it, look for my grandson, Marcus. He'll lead you to it." Despite the noise and crowd, I could hear Franny's mouth pop open. "Upgraded? Oh, my stars. Thank you so much, Miss Magda," she said slowly as she glanced down at the shining name tag on the woman's chest. Magda kept the same dazed smile on her face. "Of course. Anything for friends." I raised a brow but couldn't help but laugh as TJ muttered for Franny to take a chill pill. Franny was full of surprises lately. We ascended up the escalator to where we would finally walk on board. The murmurs of everyone else around us picked up as the doors to the plankway pushed open. Flanked by 2 police officers on either side, a tall man with a neatly trimmed mustache put his arms wide. "Welcome, friends, to the Magnolia on water. You will take part of this prestigious adventure very soon, but first I must ask that you keep your sensibilities about you. We are under public scrutiny until we are off, so keep this in mind as you make your way to your accommodations. My name is Walter Sinclair, and I am the head of the Magnolia's Maritime Security Team. My team and I will do our very best to protect each and every patron on board this beautiful vessel. Once you have found your rooms, you will find your instructions printed on the back of your entry door. We are required by U.S. maritime law to participate in what we refer to as a muster drill. This will require everyone on board's cooperation before we set sail, so we know that everything will go smoothly in case of an emergency. Can everyone in the back hear me?" I turned around. It looked as though there was only one group of about 500 people, including us, being let in at a time. Mr. Sinclair would be making this speech more than once, it seemed. "Very good. Please proceed, and may I present to you Magnolia on Water." There was a loud, audible gasp sweeping through our initial crowd of people as he and his men moved aside for everyone to start passing through. With our luggage already sent to our room, in record time no less, all we had to do was to find wherever our rooms were, which was difficult considering how everyone seemed to stop right in the front of the docking point. "Move along, folks, move along," Cinda called out, pulling both me and TJ along with her. I was admittedly surprised to see even TJ with her jaw dropped open. The entrance on Deck 5 was glittering with the kind of lights I expected to see in Vegas, bright, attention-grabbing, and colorful. Signs for shops and restaurants, bars, and more were assaulting my senses like I'd never seen before. "According to the map, this is the main deck, or blooming promenade. Sorta looks like a mall, doesn't it? Like a big, fancy mall," Franny said, the lights reflecting in her eyes as she took it all in. "They weren't skimping when it comes to the decor, were they?" Cinda murmured as we followed behind Franny. I shook my head. People streamed in behind us, pushing us deeper into the soon-to-be crowded space. It was a muddled mess if I'd ever seen one. I wasn't a big fan of being in confined spaces with a ton of people, funny enough, especially given my last career. But being on the Magnolia was a different feeling altogether. Even though I knew I was on a ship, it sure didn't feel like it. "What does it say on the map, Francine?" Gina called out over the din of noise. "Do we need to go up or down?" "Up," Franny hollered. "To the top up." TJ managed to squeeze herself through the throng of people in order to push the button to one of the dozen elevators neatly lined in a row. The door dinged as it opened, and without apology, all 5 of us rushed on board, anxious to be rid of everyone else. A couple, and I assumed their daughter, slid inside as well, all of us wearing the same relieved expression. The man laughed. "You'd think we'd be a little more civilized on here," he said, shaking his head. "This is our first time." He tilted his chin toward his family. "Both of my girls here refuse to get on without their morbus medicini, always mint-flavored, of course." I froze. Morbus medicini? What were the chances? And was this man really so brazen to admit that to an elevator of strangers? Oh my, things really have changed since the high order of magical beings went public, but there's no way I'm admitting anything. A frown slowly pulled at the corner of his mouth until I fixed a smile on my own. "Sorry, it's our first time, too," I said carefully. Hopefully the guy would get the picture and leave it alone. They hopped off a few floors up and left us thankfully by ourselves as the elevator sped upward. I could see the weird looks on both Gina's and Cinda's faces, but I kept facing forward, doing my best to shake off the encounter. "Franny, how far up are we going exactly?" Gina finally said. Franny flipped through her glossy pamphlet that held a colorful map of the entire ship interior. "I think maybe this starred floor right here?" She pointed to a circular shape in the middle of the ship, something that read, "The Rotunda, VIP Guests and Suites." The picture was hard to imagine from a top view, but whatever the case, it sounded fancy. "VIP Guests," Gina read softly. We reached the top floor and all looked at one another. The door opened, and I nearly stopped dead in my tracks. We all did. This was no ordinary landing with directions for half of the rooms on one side and the other half going down the opposite hall like in any standard hotel. No, this was a different kind of beast. The first thing you saw as you exited the elevator was the huge crystal chandelier hanging from a brilliant stained glass skylight. The skylight alone was domed and spread across nearly the entire room. Underneath was a fountain, complete with a mermaid and 2 large koi fish sprouting from her outstretched hands, water streaming from the fishes' mouths. Around the fountain was purple velvet bench seating that stretched the length of it. It would have looked right at home in Buckingham Palace, in my opinion. Studying the scene of the stained glass dome above us, I noticed lights twinkling from in between each panel. It was so over the top that I had to take a moment and laugh. No expense was barred here for sure. "Look, TJ, this floor has its own coffee bar and barista. Can you believe it?" Cinda exclaimed, rushing over to the counter and swiping her hand along the top of it as if to make sure it was real. "I'd be more impressed if they had a real bar up here," TJ said, shrugging. "But This ain't too shabby. Not too shabby at all." "Well, if TJ approves, then it must be good," Franny said as she winked at us. "No bar, I'm afraid, but you will find that the room attendants are more than happy to take drink requests for our special guests." A man's voice floated over top of the soft hum of music piping through the hidden speakers. "Ladies," the young man said, giving the 5 of us a slight bow. He stood back up, and there was a polite smile. If I had to guess, he was probably in his early to mid-30s, probably around Gina's daughter Ruby's age. His dark, curly mop of hair was endearing in a way, and it went staunchly against the pressed suit that held an old family crest upon the lapel and cufflinks. "My name is Marcus Lai. I'm the Director of Hospitality Operations here on the Magnolia. As special guests of our captain, you'll be pleased to know that we've taken care of all your belongings. The Rotunda suites sleep up to 8 people, so you should find yours spacious enough." "Oh, wow! Captain's special guests?" Cinda whispered to Gina and TJ. I raised a brow at the young man and checked Franny's expression. She seemed just as surprised as we were. "Y'all really do know how to make a girl feel special." Franny laughed and placed her hand over her heart. "Which way is it to Suite B?" Marcus took a few steps back and pointed to one of the brightly colored doors. "Suite B is all yours, ladies. Our cruise director will be making an announcement out on the main deck, which is 4 floors down from here, and she needs everyone on the ship to attend the emergency drill. You should find everything you need on the back of the door to your stateroom." He waited a beat for us all to nod. "Did you have any questions for me?" Franny quickly raised her hand. "I'd love to meet the captain, if that's at all possible, and thank him, them. Is that something we could arrange?" Marcus smiled. "Of course. I'll let him know." "Wonderful!" Franny replied with a wide grin of her own, already making a beeline for the door to the room. "Of course, Mrs. Penna." I stopped short. "I'm sorry," I began carefully, not wanting to ruffle any feathers just yet. "Did you say Mrs. Penna?" Marcus whipped his head toward me and blinked. "Yes." I bit my lip. Part of me wanted to correct him, but a larger part of me wanted to wait and see what exactly was going on. Okay. We'll just get ready for the drill then. Thank you for the lovely suite." He nodded, still looking a little confused, and gave a little bow before heading toward a door that read "Staff Only." No one else seemed to notice the slip-up but me, as Franny was too busy walking inside the suite with TJ and Cinda. Gina was already pulling out her camera to get some shots of the place, and that left me looking around at the rest of the circular room. There were 3 more doors, which means we would likely have plenty of peace and quiet with so few neighbors. I shook off the weirdness with the name mix-up and followed after the girls. The room was grander than I could have pictured. My expectations were low to begin with, as we figured we'd be squeezed into 2 conjoining staterooms, but this beat that by a million miles. It was easily the size of a penthouse, nearly as big as my old penthouse at the MGM Grand, in fact, and every bit as glitzy to boot. The first thing you saw as you walked in was the water. A long line of windows curved in from halfway up the far wall all the way to the ceiling. We were lucky enough for our part of the rotunda to already be facing out to the open water that would lead to our next port in Key West. The water sparkled between the strips of land on either side. Without curtains obscuring our view, we would be able to see the horizon across the entire expansion of the living room. The windows let in the sunlight, but as I walked closer to look out the window, I could feel the nice, cool air. The glass must have been tinted on the other side. I nearly jumped out of my skin, though, when Franny also came over to investigate and accidentally hit a button that seemed to generate
Sample complete. Ready to continue?